I'm incredibly excited to introduce Matt Levine, who is the first speaker actually in the HALB Dream Big speaker series. Oh, thank you. A bit about the Dream Big speaker series, actually. This is the first year that we're doing it, and I don't know about some of you guys, but a lot of the people in the HALB community and friends of mine have sometimes felt pressure from friends or family or the school to take certain career paths out of law school. And one of our big missions this year is to invite inspirational people who can speak through their career paths and inspire you to maybe think about something unconventional or to dream big. I'm doubly excited to introduce...
Be a blogger.
That's what he'll be talking about. I think for me, I've actually subscribed to Levine's newsletter for the longest time, and interviewing him is almost like interviewing an old friend, even though we just met. It just felt like a good time to ask some of these really big career questions. So I wanted to give a quick summary of his career so that you guys can also ask questions at the end. Matt completed his classics degree at Harvard undergrad before, you could stop me if I'm totally wrong, by the way, and completed law school at Yale. From there, he clerked for the Third Circuit Court of Appeals for a year before starting as an M&A attorney at Wachtell. From then, he got bored of being a lawyer, it seems, and worked at Goldman Sachs in investment banking. Again, pivoted from there into an editor position at Dealbreaker before starting Money Stuff. So
actually, the editor is like a fake title that a lot of us I was just writing. I never edited that.
So please join me in welcoming Matt Levine.
Thank you for having me. Is my mic okay? It is. Yes.
So maybe we can start from the beginning of your career. After college, you started at a more second-tier law school, Yale.
After college, I taught high school Latin for a year.
Oh, okay.
It didn't really go anywhere, but it was.
Well, then my question was actually why you decided to go to law school.
Because, I went to college. I was a classics major. Only really two things you can do with the classics degree. One is like you get a PhD and you become a classics professor, which is a hard life because there's 4 jobs. And the other thing you can do is go to law school, and so I did that. With the sort of it was a compromise. I was like, I'm going to go to law school and be a law professor, which is like being a classics professor, except that it's a 3-year degree instead of a 10-year one. And you get paid more, and there are more jobs. And if it doesn't work out, you can go to a law firm. Whereas with classics, you can't go to a Greek firm. So I went to law school because that's the path for classics majors.
I've read online that you wanted to be a law professor first. So why did you decide to go into big law instead?
Because honestly, I got to law school being I'll be a con law professor, and then I'll write about important issues. And I found con law, I found public law not very intellectually engaging, and I found contracts really intellectually engaging. And I had also read Barbarians of the Gate at an impressionable age, and Liar's Poker, and I was I could do deals. And so so that's one part of the answer. Is I decided I didn't really I vaguely still wanted and still want to be a law professor, but a corporate law professor, not a con law professor. If you want to do that, you should probably practice for a while. And also just this is a time, I think it's probably still a time like this here, where if you were a 2L, you go to a law firm for the summer because they'll pay you more than you've made in your life for the summer, and it's you'll learn what law is. So I did interviews for law firms, and I got offers from law firms that were you'll have a lot of lunches. And I got an offer from Wachtell that was yeah, you'll do deals over the summer. It'll be terrible. You'll never have lunch. And I thought, well, if I want to know what this is, because I don't really want to be at a law firm, if I want to know what this is, I should go to the one that will show me what it is. And so I did that. And it was really fun. And terrible, but really fun.
So you worked there for a few years.
Oh no, I worked there for a year and a half. It's dog years, so it's it felt like a long time, but it was a long time, but it was a year and a half.
Okay. So after working there for a year and a half, you then decided to jump into investment banking.
Yeah. That was fun too. No, I mean like, so this is another like, this is all before your time, but like, this is like in 2007 when like, if you worked at a law firm as a corporate lawyer, you were like, I want to be in finance. I guess that's still true for a lot of corporate lawyers, but like in 2007, you just did it. And so after like a year and a half, like there's a guy who started with me at Wachtell who left after like 6 months to go to Goldman. And after he spent a year at Goldman, they were like, you can hire someone to like sort of transition into your job. And so he called me and he was like, do you want a job? And I said, is it better than this job? And he said, it's a little better than that. And I said, when do you get in the morning? He told me, I said, when do you leave? And like, how do you, and like, we talked about his hours extensively, and I was like, you're right, that's a little better. I joke a lot that I'm like the only person to go to Goldman for the lifestyle, but it was a calculate, like it was a better lifestyle, so it worked. It was the correct move, sort of.
Okay, I want to talk about your journalism career. Before that, I read online as well that you, of all the varied careers you've had, you've ranked clerking as the best.
Oh yeah, it's the only one that's not a career too. Like you can't be a clerk.
Right.
Like you can be, but it's like if you're a career clerk, it's not as fun as being a year-long term clerk. But it's so good. You should clerk. I know. I'm sorry. Like it's hard to be lucky, but you should clerk. It's fun. It's like it was. It's like first of all, it is a year, which is nice. Like I met my wife clerking, but also like it's just like you're like in a city for a year, but you're not like stuck there. You're not like this isn't your life. It's like a fun thing to do for a year, and then you you just like. For me at least, and it's not true for every judge, but like for me it was like you just sort of like sit around trying to get things right and like write things in a persuasive, correct way. It's the only job I've had where it's like so focused on just like doing the right thing and getting the right answer and like nothing else. You're not like you're trying to advocate, but you're not like assigned a side. You're not like you're just like trying to get the things right. It's really good. It's a very like fulfilling, fun job, and like you like sometimes. Right injustices, and that was really, I don't really do that anymore.
Well, so talking about that experience, were any of your past careers influential in your decision to finally leave investment banking and the law to then write about the law with Deal Breaker?
Sure, yeah. I mean, yeah. Like, particularly in the negative sense, is that I didn't want to do them anymore. That was the main reason, like, it's sort of embarrassing. Like, the main reason, it's like, I had always, like, vaguely imagined myself being a writer, and when I say vaguely, I mean, like, I imagined myself having written a famous novel without having it, like, it's not like I had, like, a bunch of, like, drafts started. Like, I didn't have any idea what this novel was about that I had written, but it made me famous. And so, like, I vaguely wanted to be a writer, and when I was at, like, Wachtell, but then especially at Goldman, I was at Wachtell, I was like, I'm tired, and I'll do something else. Something else is like finance, right? So I'm like, I'll do finance, right? And like someone's like, come to Goldman. I'm like, well, Goldman is finance, I'll do that. And then at Goldman, like the sort of like exit options actually narrowed. Because like I wasn't gonna go to a hedge fund or whatever. Like I interviewed a little bit, it's hard. But like, and also I didn't like it, and so I wanted to do something radically different. And I was like, I'm gonna be a writer. But like, that was mainly, like, it was more a reaction to not being happy as a banker than like having like a real like career plan to like be a journalist or a blogger or whatever. I wasn't like, be a blogger, It turns out that I'm like temperamentally and otherwise suited to be a blogger, but like I didn't really know that. I just knew I wasn't suited to be an investment banker anymore, and like this was a thing that I could do that one would hire me, that two felt like a really big change, and that sort of scratched this like vague itch I'd have. So I don't know. But then like by the way, like everything except probably being a Latin teacher, but everything else that I did before that was like extremely informative to what I actually do now, right? Like I write about law and finance, and like the thing I did at Goldman is this like super weird desk that was like designing derivatives trades and also underwriting convertible bonds, and so I was somehow like touching like the sales side and the trading side and like derivatives math and like tax and accounting structuring and like underwriting and investment banking and like a little bit of M&A. So I just sort of like touched a lot of, and like bank treasury stuff. They touched a lot of areas of the bank that are in, like, you know, if I were like an M&A banker, I wouldn't have like really interacted with the trading side. If I were a trader, I wouldn't really interact with the investment banking side. If I was in this weird seat that sort of touched everything, and that was really like helpful in sort of having a broader picture of the financial industry.
Would you say your environment was very humorous? Because you've sustained a sense of humor throughout all of these careers, even though you found it, I guess, depressing.
Yeah, I don't know, I didn't find Goldman like depressing exactly. Like I had like friends who were like, we sat around like making jokes. You know, it's like you know, like investment banking is like this like fratty vibe of like you're sitting around at all hours like making fun of each other. You know, like mostly what you do. So like it was, you know, like the reason I didn't like investment banking like was largely that like the sort of like fundamental thing, the like basic business of like sales and like convincing people to do a deal, convincing people they should do the deal with you, and convincing them to add on some bells and whistles that made their derivative more expensive in like a hidden way was not appealing to me. It's not appealing to a lot of people, including a lot of people who do it. Like one thing I've noticed is there are a lot of like former derivative salespeople who like when they quit, like devote themselves to like yelling about how bad derivative sales is. Like there's Greg Smith, who's the guy who wrote the Why I Left Goldman Sachs op-ed, who like he sold derivatives and he's like, this is the evilest job in the world after doing it for like 4 years and quit and like wrote a book about how bad Goldman is. But then like, you know, my former boss now runs a sort of boutique-y like tech/consulting firm that basically helps companies not get taken advantage of by my former desk. And he's like one of like 4 people who used to run desks like that who now have consultancies like that. So it's really like there's it's like a real cognitive dissonance among people who sell derivatives. And I was one of them. And so I did, like the thing I didn't like was like getting on planes and going to companies and being like, do a derivative with us, which is like the only thing. So like I had to leave. But like the day to day was like, yeah, I like the people. They were smart. They were funny. Like it was fun. Yeah.
So then an opportunity opened up at Dealbreaker for you to switch, and you said, were you immediate about that, or you?
Yeah, no, I quit before what I did was I went to my boss and I was like, I want to quit. And he was like, what are you going to do? I was like, I just don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to like take 6 months and try to figure out what to do with my life and write my novel. And he's like, this is a dumb idea. You should stay here and take like 2 months of leave and figure out what you want to do and like still be like on the health insurance. And I was like, oh, that's like a nice point. I should do that. And he's like, okay, let's arrange for when you can take your leave. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, well, you have some deals now. So like basically I went back to my desk for like another month. And then Dealbreaker was hiring and I applied. And I sort of knew people there and like their bar is low because they don't pay you very much. And if you're bad at it, you'll just like, it's so embarrassing that you quit. So, again, you know, like blogging is like a, you know, Darwinian sort of, you know, you can't just like do it every day if you suck, because like people in the comments are so mean. So I like got that job like without much like qualification, and then I went to my boss like, okay, this time I really quit, and he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm going to Dealbreaker. He's like, okay, you should take your like 2 weeks, you know, to like finish up deals. And I was like, that's a surprise, but okay. And I like went back to my desk and I told everyone, and they were like, that's weird. And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna go home because like, you know, it's like 4 o'clock. And I left and my phone rang as I was like crossing the street and it was my boss and he's like, did you say Deal Book? And I was like, or did you say Breaking Views? I was like, no, I said Dealbreaker. He's like, yeah, you can't come back in the building anymore. So I hired Goldman. And then I spent my 2 months of gardening leave like worried they were gonna have me killed because I was super paranoid and like Dealbreaker. Kind of like it's shorthand. It's like kind of like a Wall Street gossip blog. It isn't really, but like it has that vibe. It used to, like the tagline before I got there was a Wall Street tabloid. I think it was sort of a little bit alarming for Goldman that I was going there with like whatever secrets I had. But then I wasn't actually going to be like exposing Goldman.
Did you worry a bit about the pay cut or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank God. Worry. Like, it wasn't a worry. I wasn't like, oh, will I get paid the same amount? No, it was just like, no, like, because I really did try to quit with like no job. I was really like, you know, I've saved money and I'm going to spend some of it to like improve my life. And then like a job came along and I was like, well, I'll get paid like a little bit of money as well, you know, great. So it was, you know, I was coming from the mindset of like, I was like leaving for no money, and so I was leaving for like a little bit of money. It was great, but I worried about it. Like I had a budget. I had like a year where I could do it, and then I had to do something else. And then I did it for 2 years, but like it was, you know, it was like there was an expiration date on me getting paid blogger money.
So maybe for those in the audience who don't read money stuff as regularly, how would you say your role is in the financial legal industry, and maybe describe a bit about the blog?
I don't know. It's a daily newsletter about financial stuff, and no one believes that it's named money stuff. I get so many emails that are like, "I love money talk. Morning money is so good." It's really, no one believes. Like it's like there's some sort of like block where people think it's more serious than it is. I don't know. Like I write about finance stuff. I don't have a role. Like I don't know. I just like write what I think is. I try to write interestingly about things that I think are interesting, and like that's about it. And like it has found a certain resonance with enough people that like, and like fancy enough people that like I can continue doing it. But there's not like, it's not. I don't know. Like there's no like practical or like ulterior like thinking behind what it is. It's just like, if I think it's interesting, I write about it.
Okay.
And it's every day, and you know, it goes out by email, on the Bloomberg terminal, on the website, whatever. It's platform agnostic. You should read it. It's good. Or it's not.
Maybe in deciding what topics you want to cover every day, do you sort of have like a chuckle test or some sort of laugh test to decide?
Oh yeah, I mean like, like one reason that I do it as an email newsletter, you know, I come from like blogging, and like it used to be, like when it was a deal breaker, you could write a blog post that was like a funny headline and then an excerpt from an article, you know. And that sort of went away as a genre. And like people don't do that anymore, like, because Twitter exists. So like instead of like writing a funny headline and putting it on your website and serving ads on that website and people going to your website and reading your funny headline and viewing your ads and giving you money, you just write a joke about it on Twitter and the money goes to Twitter, which is like terrible for the media business model, but like media people love Twitter for self-interested reasons. But so like the blog kind of went away, and so you have to, like the only thing you can write is like a thing that like people can't like get from Twitter. And so, but the email newsletter is nice because like you can what I write is like a series of sections, and like you can have like a section that's like 1,500 words about like some substantive matter, and then a section that's like a joke, you know. So it's a good, like it allows you to write like different like lengths and formats in a way that like if you had to like, if everything had to be its own self-contained thing, you couldn't do that. So anyway, that's a sort of oblique answer to the chuckle test, which is like, I write about things for various reasons. Like one is because like I think they're interesting and I have something interesting to say about them, and that's like differentiated. Where like most people who, you know, like, I've like been in financial media for like 8 years now, and like, you know, like I kind of like know like a story will come out, and I kind of be like, yeah, this is what everyone will say about it. And if I have something different to say that's like more informed, I'm like, great, that's terrific. And that's rare, but it happens. And then like other things are like, I write about them because I have to write about them because like it's become my shtick. So like if terrible news happens at WeWork, I'm like, I gotta write about it. Right? Or like when Elon Musk was like exploding Tesla every day, you know, like there's like a series of stories where I'm just like sort of like chained to them. And then you know, like, but then like there's other things that are like, if it's really funny, I can make one joke about it. Or like, you know, if there's like a really interesting paper, I can be like, here's a really interesting paper, and like not like, and like summarize its argument in like a sentence and then move on. You know, like there's like a variety. Like for me to like write about something, like one is like I write a like argumentative essay, like trying to reframe the thing, but there are other ways, including like just quoting it and moving on, that are like available in the email newsletter genre or whatever I do.
Maybe what's one of the funniest things you've ever written, you think? Sorry, curveball.
That's hard. I love writing imaginary conversations. I find them like really, I just, you know, I find them really informative because like, because first like they're jokes, right? Like you write like like, you know, I read about like trading robots and like have dialogue between like the trader and the robot. That's fun, right? Or, like I had, you know, when Elon Musk like got in a lot of trouble for like tweeting bad tweets, like there was a guy, there was a person who's never been named, but there's some secret person who's his Twitter sitter, who's like a senior securities lawyer who's supposed to review his tweets, although he's not allowed to review his tweets. But I've imagined dialogues between Elon and that guy, which are, you know, and I just like, it's fun because like, you know, like this, like a lot of what I do is like it's distinct from like other journalists. Like a lot of what I do is just sort of imagining myself in the situations and thinking like, you know, like what, like as a person who's like been a lawyer and a banker, like what would I do? Like why are these things happening? Like I feel like when I write about like derivatives trades, like there's this thing in like journalism, in like financial journalism, where a lot of people are like, this must be fraud, let's find the fraud. And like for me, I like sold derivatives, and like I know it wasn't always like about fraud, sometimes it was about like tax advantages. And so like I sort of try to put myself in the shoes of the person doing the trade and being like what is the like actual intuition here behind this trade? So like that's one thing I do. But then also like just socially, like you know, like just like what would it feel like to be the senior securities lawyer who like was first in his class at Harvard Law School, who like has had a sterling career and is now like telling Elon Musk not to tweet the bad tweets. Like, it's just like weird, and like it's like so much like there's this seriousness about the world that is like, you know, like the actual like social experience of some of these people is like very weird and funny, and so like it's fun to write the dialogue because like you're like very concretely imagining yourself being in that situation, like helping the readers to imagine themselves being in that situation and helping them realize that it's actually really funny, although like, you know, not necessarily presented that way otherwise. You know.
Okay, I think it seems like from your personality you're able to do this really well, and it seems like you also didn't take yourself too seriously because, I was gonna mention a story last week where the newsletter came out late, and you tweeted that you forgot to press the button.
I did.
Is that because there's no team behind you? Is it just
there's a team, I have an editor, but like I pressed the button. And so when this happened, by the way, like a bunch of journalists emailed me, like my like journalist friends emailed me like, you should really not be in charge of pressing the button. Someone should press the button for you. I said, no, I love pressing the button. Like I messed it up like once in like 6 years. But like I control the means of production. You know, I have the printing press. You know, like I get to, you know, like I don't like I feel it's funny. Like I worked for Bloomberg, and Bloomberg is really nice and like treat me really well, and I like working for Bloomberg. I like having an editor. I like going to the office and like seeing people and like being around other journalists and talking about ideas and whatever. But like the newsletter has this like very like direct connection with my readership, where like it's got my name on the subject line and like or like on the sender line. Actually, it doesn't actually come from my account, but it says it comes from my account. And people, I think, have a, you know, you said at the, you know, at the beginning of this that you feel like you know me. Like people have that experience. Like the connection that I have with my readership is like more direct than like, you know, is normal in journalism. You know, I say like, you know, my wife will read the New Yorker and she'll be like, oh, I'm reading this good article about whatever, and I'll be like, who wrote it? Because I'm like a journalist. I'm like, who wrote it? You know, and she like often doesn't know because like for a normal person, like you're not like focused on the byline. But like with my thing, it comes from my email address supposedly, and so like there is this like direct connection, which is really nice to have. Like the pressing the button is not like essential to that, but it like feels like connected to that. Yeah, but like I don't like, and like part of that, like to your question, like I don't have to take myself seriously in a sort of public-facing way. Obviously, the Twitter account is a construct too, and like, you know, there's like you're trying to convey something that is not necessarily true, but like, you know, like my relationship with my readers is not like I have done the good thing and like look at it, you know, in its polished majesty. It's like my relationship with my readers is like I'm a person, right? It's like when I don't send the email for 2 hours, I have to be like, yeah, sorry guys, because like, you know, there's like a more personal relationship there than there might otherwise be.
You've mentioned before that writing the newsletter is actually more stressful than your investment banking job at Goldman.
Oh yeah.
Can you talk a bit about your writing process each day?
I wake up and panic. And you know, I wake up around 5, I panic. I like sort of start putting it together. My daughter wakes up, I hang out with her for a while, and then she leaves, and I write from until about 11 or so, and then send it to an editor, and then it goes out. So that's like the bare mechanics of the process. And then it goes out, and I like go into work and like read for the next day. Other than that, there's not much process. I don't know. Like I don't like it operates on panic. It works because it has to work. And so like I mostly trust that it will somehow happen every day. This is not ideal, right? Like it's not like there are some number of like topics and stories that I haven't been able to do because like they would take like 2 days, and like it's very hard for me to take 2 days. But there are advantages, which is like I feel like I can be reasonably substantive and good and fun and funny, and like the time pressure leads to a certain spontaneity in the argument and writing, and like I was just at my law school reunion, and like all my classmates are law professors, and they're like, and some of them are like, how do you write every day? And like the answer is I could not write at their frequency. Like I was a law student, and I wrote like a big paper, which is like sort of like a law review article, but like worse. And mine was. And it took me until 2 weeks after graduation. I got a blank diploma, and at that, and then like a week after graduation, like the panic set in and got done, but like badly. But my theory is that like everyone who like has a writing job has like a like correct metabolism, and like for some people it's like every 6 months, and for some people it's every week, and for me it's every day. And if I had to write every week, and I've had that sort of set up sometimes, it would be very hard. And if I had to write every like 6 months, it would be very hard. But daily works for me, which is like sad because it's like the most uncompromising frequency, but it's the one that works for me. So.
Okay, so you mentioned you walk into the office and you read a bunch of news sources. What are some of the sources you read most?
Oh, everything. I don't know. Like people are always like, oh, what should I read? I'm like, I professionally read things. Like that's like my job. Is like I read the internet, and so people are like, oh, what do you like? Everything. I don't know. Like I read like so much of what I write about is like reading like the front page of the Wall Street Journal and like the homepage of Bloomberg and like the FT and like like the most standard news sources. You're like, where do you get your ideas? Like the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Because like a lot of what I do is like write about like the like big financial news of the day. Other things I do are write about like I read the SEC homepage because it's full of hilarious enforcement actions. Or like I have an RSS feed really, but like I get like every SEC enforcement action, and like I'll read the first paragraph and like this is funny, and I'll read the rest of it. I try to have some access to academic papers. Sometimes that's from professors sending me their papers because I was joking with my law professor classmates. like people send me papers and I'll go on our SSRN and it'll be like there's about 35 downloads. I bet I can triple that, right? Like, if I link to a paper, it spikes on the SSRN download because I don't know how important it is for an academic career, but like I feel like a little bit of an academic kingmaker. Like if you're a corporate law scholar, you should like buy me drinks. That's a joke. I know this is being recorded. That's a joke. I'm not actually in it for the bribes, but I was thinking about it.
So there are certain subjects that you cover more than others, like blockchain and crypto, for example.
It's funny. I gave a talk at some government agency, and they were like, and there was a guy who's like, I don't read your column, but like, I was like looking at the website, and like your 10 most viewed articles are all about crypto, and isn't that all bullshit? And isn't crypto stupid? And I was like, my 10 most downloaded are not the same as like my 10 favorite. It's that like the crypto stuff like gets eyeballs. For various reasons, like one, people just like it, or they used to. It's gotten a little bit less attention. People like it, but also like it, like there are channels of like distribution for like crypto people where like if you write skeptically or not about a crypto thing, like they all send it to their friends, and then it goes on like the message boards, and then like 1 million people read it. Anyway, sorry.
Well, no, I wondered if you could describe one of the craziest stories you've heard in this space, because right now it's like such a.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, like my favorite crypto thing, and I've written about this. there's a thing called DentaCoin, which is it's like the world's first cryptocurrency for dentists, and it makes no more sense than that. And they email me every day, for like 3 years. I get a press release or like a press email from DentaCoin being like a dental practice in New Jersey has adopted DentaCoin. Which doesn't mean it's like the thing it's like all the buzzwords. It's like, get paid for flossing your teeth. You can mine DentaCoin by flossing your teeth, and also you can use it for payment at the dentist. It makes no sense. Like it's wonderful. It's like, I'm sorry, DentaCoin. I'm sure you're great. Like they actually seem like lovely for a crypto project, but like there was like a time where it was just like you just add the words on the blockchain to the end of the sentence, and like it was like an idea as a business. You could raise funding for it, and that time has sort of ended like a little bit, but it was it was very frustrating because like I don't know, like people getting rich and you're like, what, you, why? But like it was also like a fun time because it was like just endless comedy, just endless like crazy stuff getting like money and like mainstream attention for just like silly ideas.
So a bit more of a substantive question, I guess. You said you read the SEC homepage a lot.
Yeah.
Do you find that the disclosure laws right now are sort of sufficient, and the securities laws are sufficient to cover the space, or?
I don't know. I mean, like, I tend not to think about those things. I sort of, I going to law school, like, oh yeah, this is how it works. This is the only way it could possibly work. How could it work differently? But like, I don't know. I've been thinking about it a little, it is funny that it's funny that like in the current round of like sort of unicorn ideas, like a lot of people wrote columns, like journalists, but also like investors, being like, we can't understand WeWork's business from its disclosures. Like, isn't that kind of interesting? Like, like the thing that you need to know economically about WeWork's business is not its historical financials, but something else, right? And like maybe that something else is just like a series of like undefined predictions about the future, and like you can't understand it because it's not understandable. But like maybe maybe there's some like thing that clearly the thing that like WeWork would present to its private investors to convince them to invest, and frankly the thing that they present in an IPO and like in the form of like investor decks is different from the thing that is in like the S1, and like it is possible that like the disclosure requirements should be more like the stuff that actual investors want to know about actual businesses than like audited historical financials. That shit turns real slowly, and like it is true that like the disclosure laws are sort of about like fraud prevention more than they are about like useful information. It's a mix, and they keep adding bits of information like, oh, you should disclose if you use conflict minerals. But like I think for a lot of companies and a lot of investors, like the thing you really want to know is like your 5-year financial projections, and like that would always be fraud in like the microcap space. And so like the SEC is not going to be like, oh, let's have 5-year projections. But it's a hard thing to solve.
Okay, I'm gonna try and open it up to everyone for questions, but I guess for the final question, with all of your experience, would you recommend to students to sort of take the same path you did, or do anything?
It's funny, sure, my path was fun. Like I don't know, like it's so dumb, but so I'm like really happy and fulfilled and super stressed, but like happy and fulfilled with what I do now. But like, and I did other things where I was less happy and less fulfilled. But like, if you had told me out of law school, like just go blog right now, or like out of college, for that matter, just go blog right now and skip all of the intermediate stuff, like that would have been terrible, because I wouldn't know what I was talking about, and I wouldn't have various kinds of built-in credibility from what I did in the interim. So you should certainly take my career path if it's open to you, but it's like pretty silly. No, I mean I don't know if you guys get this. At Yale, there's a long tradition, getting back at least to when Guido Calabresi was the dean, of you like gather the 1Ls in an auditorium on orientation week, and Guido and then his successors would give a speech saying, "You've been on a treadmill your whole lives. Now you've arrived. Get off the treadmill." And like no one believes this because like they decreasingly believe it, and it's absurd because like in fact everyone at Yale is gunning for a Supreme Court clerkship, right? Like no one is off the treadmill, but like there is a kernel of wisdom in it, which is that like Guido like after like became a judge and a professor, right? Like those are all hard things to get, but like there's a kernel of wisdom to it, which is that you do prestige experiences until you've accrued enough prestige, and then you like trade the prestige into the thing you want. For the most part, right? Like some people just accrue prestige until they die, but like, and for some of them that's just like because the thing they because they're like intrinsically interested in like the things that happen to accrue prestige. But like, and for some of them it's because they're psychopaths and are interested directly in the accruing of prestige. But like. For a lot of people, it's like you do it, like you work at like a big law firm until you can't anymore, and then like you go like open your like pie shop, right, or whatever. Like there's that's like from a pattern perspective, that's like a very common career path, right? Not the pie shop, but like you do the like accruing of the things until you stop, and then like you can do what you want, and that's a good path. Like you should do that. And you shouldn't necessarily stop now, right? You shouldn't be like, well, I'm at Harvard Law School, time to open a pie shop. But like, you should like think about like, like you accrue like instrumental jobs and the money and the whatnot. But then like at some point you trade it for freedom, and that's like a good trade probably. I think.
Okay, on that inspirational
Dream
note.
big.
So we don't have a mic to pass around. I'll repeat your question for the recording, but go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Two quick questions. The first is, I've always wondered why you don't just start, you mentioned you have a strong connection with your readers, why you don't just start your own newsletter on Substack and charge $10 a month and probably...
Turn off the camera.
Probably earn a lot more than you do now. And the second,
Really? All right.
The second quick question was just, after your experience at Wachtell and Goldman and so on, what area would you suggest for folks who are in law school or business school, kind of the most critical area to understanding corporate finance that has been most useful to you?
Okay, quick translation. Business model of the newsletter, and then what was the career path or the reason for choosing investment banking, or which would help for a corporate finance career?
I feel like okay, so your first question is, why do I not go off on my own and charge $10 a month on Substack and sell my newsletter directly to the readers? You're not the first person to ask me that. So one answer is that I like working for a company generally. I like having a job generally, and I like working for Bloomberg particularly. Like they're nice. It is not like my writing process is not like a huge amount of like working with other journalists, but like it is a lot of talking to other journalists. It's nice to have that. I like having health insurance. And the biggest answer is that my newsletter right now is free, and so it goes to more people than it would if I were charging $10 a month. And the advantages to me of distribution are big, and they are like both in terms of like I get more readers and like whatever the economic value of the thing is increases, but also in terms of like I get like substantial non-monetary compensation out of like being a little bit famous, and I would be significantly less a little bit famous if I were charging $10 a month for my newsletter, right? Like I think is the answer. Your second question is like what areas of finance are like important to understanding the world, something like that. Is that sort of like I don't know. Like one thing I did at a bank was like learn a little bit about bank plumbing. Like I don't know how important banks are to the world, honestly. But like for me, like I feel like bank like what a bank is, how a bank's balance sheet works, like how like the treasury function of a bank works, like what repo is. Like these are all like unintuitive to a lot of people who work in finance, right? Like these are like this like highly levered, like overnight liquidity business model is super weird. And like when there's a financial crisis, it's like because of that. And like everyone's like, what? Like how? Like repo? What? And so like there's an advantage in sort of understanding like those just mechanical, like what a highly levered financial institution, how it works. That is hard to understand from the outside. And the outside includes like a law firm or a hedge fund or private equity fund. Like so like to me that's interesting. But I don't know what else. Learn the blockchain. I don't know.
Speaking of overnight liquidity and repo,
Okay.
first of all, I totally agree that like nobody in finance like understands repo until it blows up. But second,
Or after.
right. I read your thing on repo, like whenever the repo blow up happened, and you mentioned that you thought that liquidity regulations were a big part of just like higher bank demand for reserves, which means that short rates and repo rates are probably going to be more volatile, and maybe it was a reason why repo rates rose a couple weeks ago. Do you think that liquidity regulations are the primary cause of this general higher bank demand for liquidity and thus less willingness to lend in the repo market when rates do rise?
Do I think that liquidity regulation is the main cause of like repo volatility and higher bank demand for liquidity? I don't know. I really don't know. That part is hard to understand from the outside, even if you sort of like mechanically understand things. Like it's like you talk to people, and like the sense of talking to people is that liquidity, like some sort of regulation seems pretty important, and it's like a little unclear what it is. You know, like people name different things, and they're weird things. They're not like the LCR. They're like the living will requirement to have like intraday liquidity is like, you know, that's like you can't like read like the rule that says that. It's like deep buried in banks' living wills is like some sort of like representation about intraday liquidity that causes them to hoard more liquidity. I don't know. I mean, like the other thing people will talk about is like the sort of the Fed's balance sheet and the sort of like balance of like treasuries versus like bank reserves. That is like a more sort of macro structural thing and a less regulatory thing. I don't know. I mean, it's like clearly it's an emergent problem of like all of the things interacting in a weird way. And when you ask people what will fix it, like the number one answer is usually the Fed giving them more money, and then the number two answer is usually tweaks to various regulatory regimes that will make banks a little bit less liquidity hoarding. So it's probably like all of the things, and like they're all at a margin where it like matters. I don't know.
You've written recently about this sort of weird debunked Vanity Fair article about insider trading by President Trump, and that like hasn't actually been withdrawn yet. I'm kind of curious, like given that financial news is so hard to understand for the average person and so easy to kind of be wrongly interpreted, do you have thoughts about how journalists can better write about the sector given it is such a sort of inaccessible, weird topic for most average people?
It's hard. Like like a huge advantage that I have is that I just like try to write interestingly about things that I think are interesting, and like enough other people find that interesting that like I keep having a job. I think that there is a model of like financial journalism for bigger audiences that is that assumes that people aren't interested and that tries to make them interested through tricks. Tricks is not the right word, but like I love like one of the things I hate is like people are like the Fed might raise rates. Here's what that means for your mortgage. It's like your mortgage is a fixed rate mortgage. But people are like, oh, a boring Fed story. You have to tell people why it matters to them. Like, and then you just tell them the wrong things. Like whatever, right? It's hard to that's not really related to the like weird story about fake insider trading in the futures market, but it is like it's sort of an original sin where like if you're like there's a belief structure that's like finance stuff is not interesting, and therefore people don't want to do it. People are doing it because they want to be sports reporters but couldn't be sports reporters, or people are doing it because they want to write about politics and they're like, oh, I can write about politicians insider trading, right? Or like they don't care that much about like they're like, I don't want to talk to a guy for an hour about like how the futures markets work, because like that's like all boring, right? But if you're like interested in it, like you can like do a better job of accurately representing it. And also, like a lot of my career is just sort of a bet that like, in fact, it's interesting enough to enough people who have enough money that like I can have a career just writing about it, like in a straight way, like straight, you know, but like just like no, I'm really interested. I'll tell you everybody, like, you know, like that like worked out for me, and like I bet it would work out for someone else. I bet there's more of a market for that than like I have filled, but in fact it is not the norm. I'm sorry, my phone is doing weird things. I'm gonna try to shut it off. It's a new phone, and
I can ask a next question.
please do.
Go ahead.
So I was curious about sort of the development of your actual voice and the way you write. So you obviously have this very sort of specific voice that, you know, with the imagined dialogues and sort of, a whole bunch of Matt Levine quirks. Are those things that were sort of consciously developed? Is that just like how you write?
So I have a friend who's a radio podcast person who's done a lot of TV, and she's like, TV producers tell you that when you start going on TV, like you develop mannerisms like talking out of one side of your mouth, and no one knows they're doing it consciously, but like the trick is to like get you back to a point where you talk like a person. And I think like that there's like a version of that in writing too, where like, you know, like when I started at Dealbreaker, I was like, the reason I can do this is because I write funny emails to my friends, right? And then when I was at Dealbreaker, we would like you know, try to like get columnists or like sort of guest contributors or whatever, and people would often apply being like, I write funny emails to my friends, I can do this. And in fact, like that's somewhat indicative of something, but it's not that useful because like you get to like, you know, the box where you're typing, and you're like, I need to do something other than like, you know, like there's like this. So like the answer to your question of how my voice develops is it's largely a process of stripping away like, you know, like trying to write something other than like how I want to write, and just sort of like writing, like making it as much as possible a sort of direct channeling of like the stuff I think to like to the box that I type in, but not entirely, right? Like you do like, you know, I'll sometimes like write a thing, and then it will be like, you know, it'll begin like, here's a thing in like a blog post, and then I'll make it the first section of money stuff, and like, I should probably have like a lead here, and they're like. So you know, like there's some amount of sort of conscious like writerly writing, and there's also like separately like I'm aware that some of the like Matt Levine tics have become like sort of annoying tics, and I try to strip some of them down a little bit.
Like which tics?
I don't know. You know, like sometimes I find myself saying like between commas too often, or like you just try to not use like the same word like 12 times. I don't know.
Grace, go ahead.
You mentioned that sometimes it's necessary to have this prestige accumulation period. I was just wondering, during your period, other than prestige and money, what else did you learn or get that you think are really valuable?
Oh, I mean, like, so the question is like, during my prestige accumulation period, what did I get besides prestige and money? Now, first of all, I want to say, like, I want to defend prestige and money. Like money in particular allowed me to take the risk to take a like low-paid writing job, right? Like, if I had, like, money is good. Money is like direct.
People who are trust fund babies who come directly.
Sure, yeah. If you have money, you don't need to accumulate money. But prestige is perhaps useful. The other thing I accumulated is I like learned stuff, like substantive stuff. Like I learned like some law and like how an M&A deal works, and how a bank conceives of and structures and books a derivatives trade, right? Like I learned a lot of stuff that I use every day. Like almost all of the stuff that I like, that like informs my writing comes from working at Wachtell and Goldman, and not from like school, or like some comes from my sort of having learned additional things in the last 8 years. But a lot of it comes from like those like 6 years of like just working in and around the financial industry. Like that's the main answer, is I learned just substantive things. You know, there's also like, you know, there's a benefit in like working at like a terrible place. Like both Goldman and Wachtell are good places, but they're both like hard places. There's a benefit in like just sort of like sucking it up and being a professional. That is, you know, like people complain sometimes about like just work stuff and journalism. Like I used to have real jobs, man. This is fine, right? Like this is better than just like having to work hard because like just people will yell at you, Like no one yells at me now, and like it's very like my life is very self-directed, and like I think it was useful having like tough jobs to be a little more self-directed.
Yeah, Zach.
You mentioned liking to see yourself as perhaps slightly of an academic kingmaker. Beyond looking at SSRN downloads, what are the metrics that you like, that you personally, or what is the single metric that you care the most to track and related to money stuff?
You mean like for me, like what do I?
For you personally, like I'm sure that there's a slew of metrics that you're getting off of all the pixels that are being embedded in the email. Like, what do you find most telling, or?
Like a great thing about my job is that I don't really get those metrics. Like they exist. Someone gets them. They don't tell me. I now, for some reason, I think I'm accidentally on an email where I learn every week how many subscribers, how many email subscribers I have, and what the open rate is. And that's like a good metric. Like that's pretty good. Like, but it's weird for me. It's sort of nice. Like I say that money stuff is platform agnostic. Like I don't care if you're I don't care if you read it in the email newsletter. Like you should read it in the Bloomberg terminal because like that brings us the most money. But like we also have a website which also brings us money. Like you have to subscribe. So like you can read it on the web. So like I don't really know how many people read it because I sort of know how many like email opens there are. But like there's some web readers which I don't get. And there's terminal readers which I rarely look at. So the answer is I don't really care. Like the metric that I care about is, do my bosses continue to pay me? And then like the secondary one that I care about, so the main one I care about is like, do I have fun? Like does it feel good and fun and honest to me and like informed and interesting? So that's the main thing, and which is like a ridiculously luxurious thing for me to be able to say, right? Like I just write it to try to be good, and like the money comes in. It's great. It's great. Like that's like it's like so nice, and like I don't like care about clicks. So that's one thing. My bosses keep paying me is another thing. And then like just like people sometimes email or tweet, and like it's nice when like it's nice to know that like prominent people read it. It's nice to know that like it's really nice. I get emails sometimes from people who are like, I don't work in the financial industry at all, but like someone turned me on to a newsletter and I really like it and it's fun. And like that's great, right? Because like it is kind of like written for-ish financial industry people, but like it tries to be accessible, but it's really nice when people are just like, I like this writing, this is fun. Which is what I try to convey. So yeah, I mean I don't follow metrics, and like, if I were and like those metrics are not that useful because like I don't have a lot of readers compared to celebrity news or whatever, right? Like the economic value of what I do is not well captured by like web readership metrics because like the average ad rate on like average web readership is kind of low. But like one hopes that the economic value I provide to Bloomberg is that like fancy people who buy Bloomberg terminals and like are prominent in the financial industry might read what I do and be like, that's good, I like this Bloomberg company. Which is hard to measure, right? It's like the sort of like cookie type metrics don't really capture that.
Do all the bloggers talk to each other? Is it like a blogger club where you
a little bit
think about? Oh,
not like all the a little bit. Like all the sort of there's not really such a thing as bloggers anymore, but there is like a financial blogger barbecue. It's at a restaurant now. It used to be at well, it's at Hill Country, but yeah, bloggers do it. Yeah.
yeah. Go ahead.
So two quick questions. The first is you've written quite a bit about banking getting kind of boring, both in terms of the folks who go into it and I guess the kinds of jobs you can do in banking. The question is, how boring can banking get, kind of moving forward? And the second question is a little bit invasive. I've noticed that the newsletter kind of comes out later and later. I just want to check in that you're okay.
Yeah, it's supposed to be noon. It's noon. It's noon. It's noon. If my bosses are watching the video, it's noon. I'm not going to repeat that one for the camera. But the other question is, how boring can banking get? I don't know. Like banking can be really boring. Like in like a sort of like Glass-Steagall, like borrowed short to lend long kind of way. Which, by the way, is actually a hair-raising business model. But Yeah, I think there's like some sort of like path-dependent limit on how boring banking can be because like all the banks are universal banks. Not all the big banks are universal banks. Right? Like, there's not a like path to like JP Morgan being a commercial bank again, right? Like people say it sometimes. It doesn't seem very plausible. So like there'll always be a sort of like the big end of banking. There'll always be like just complexity. There'll always be people running a trading business, like a securities business, and an advisory business, and a commercial banking and like a retail banking business, right? Like, not all of those things are always combined. Like Goldman doesn't really have, well, Goldman has retail, right? Like, you know, there's like they're all moving in that direction of being everything, which is, you know, there was a post-crisis time when like, and some of them are moving away from that, right? There are some people divesting their businesses, but like all in all, it seems like the whole the mashing together of all the business lines that makes banking sort of interesting and complicated and risky is not really going to be disentangled. Like there was talk of it after the crisis, it's not really happening. So there's some limit on how boring it can be. And it does feel like a little less boring,
Maybe one more question? Go ahead.
You talk a lot about how the private market's moved public. People are staying private longer and getting more money there. Do you think that trend's going to stay in light of WeWork and things?
I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, like, I think that trend is like not like there's like an accidental explanation of that is like, well, these guys, like, you know, these couple of people who run these couple of companies decided to stay private longer. It feels like there's more likely to be some sort of a structural explanation of that, which is that like there's a lot of private money, like the accessibility of it, like through like technological, like through just like interconnection of the world and like technological fundraising mechanisms, like it's a lot easier to raise large amounts of money privately, and you know, like the WeWork debacle in some ways is like we should stay private longer, right? Like that's a bad conclusion to draw from WeWork, right? Like the actual conclusion is you shouldn't invest so much money in dumb private companies at dumb valuations, but like you could imagine like being the CEO of like a big unicorn right now and being like, yeah, we'll wait another year. So I don't know. I think there might be like less like focus on it. Like it might be that there's a couple of like big names that like transitioned, and now like there'll be a while before there are so many big names that are private. Like I think like being able to do large fundraising rounds in the private markets and stay private for a long time, like that seems like that's like a thing that's kind of here to stay, I think.
Okay, everyone join me in thanking him for coming. I think they'll all come down and like ask questions too if they want to.
We're going to
Total, including us. Yeah.